So, a few days ago, Sportsnet released their final 2022 draft rankings. So, today I'm just going to be going over them. I have not read these yet. I've only seen the first three. And yeah, just going to go into them, I guess. All right, number one, Shane Wright, of course, no surprise there. Uh, yeah. Two, Logan Cooley. So, I have Slavkovsky at number two. But Cooley is, I guess, a safer pick. It says he plays with pace and skill and is a fierce competitor. Yeah, that's pretty accurate for Cooley. His upside perhaps is slightly higher than Shane Wright. He does have a tendency to make more like highlight reel plays, whereas Wright is more of like a just consistent, steady guy who's not that flashy, I guess. Three is Slavkovsky. So Slavkovsky I have at two, Cooley I have at three. I might have misspoke earlier, but yeah, so far not really any surprises. Four is Nemec. Okay, so Nemec is their highest ranked defenseman. My highest ranked defenseman is Juracek, but Nemec has higher upside in terms of offense, in my opinion. So I could totally see why they would have him as their highest ranked defenseman. It will be it will be interesting to see exactly where they have Juracek though. Could be five, could be significantly lower, and I'll also be interested to see what their third highest ranked defenseman will be. Yeah, so here we go. Juracek at five. Not too much of a surprise there. I believe Gravity had these guys at 5 and 6. So most people seem to have these guys back to back or very, very close to each other. I do as well. I believe I have Juracek at 4 and Nemec at 7. So I'm a bit more skeptical on Nemec than most people. But Juracek I really like. 5 for him, I think is fine. 6, Matthew Savoy. Okay, that is a little bit surprising. Savoy is a guy who has fallen on a lot of people's boards. Um, Although this is generally around the range he's in, a lot of people have him closer to 10 now, I would say. Um, but yeah, he's just small, kind of has small player problems. That is the main concern with Savoy. But having him at 6, that's pretty respectable. I do suspect he is a guy that will fall, though. I don't really expect him to get drafted that high. Also interesting, they have him trending up, which I didn't notice. Okay, so Juracek, they have trending up. Okay, so everybody so far has been trending up. Okay, interesting. I'll have to keep an eye on that. So at 7, they have Cutter Gauthier. That's pretty interesting. I'm a lot lower on him than a lot of people are. I'm a lot lower on him than Sportsnet 7. I understand why he's this high. He's a pretty safe pick, pretty reasonable two-way guy with a really good shot. So he is pretty projectable to the NHL. And when you're getting him, you are getting an NHL player. I'm pretty confident in that. But I think for me, his upside kind of limits him from being quite so high on my board. He does have a good shot, but that's about it in terms of his offense. I'm not super sold on his playmaking. Like he's good, but not great. And yeah, just generally speaking, I don't think you're getting a really bona fide top 6 player there. Maybe a second line guy, but really like a middle 6 to third line guy, I think is what you're getting with him. Okay, 8 is Marco Casper. I don't like that one. This is another guy that I'm not nearly as high on as a lot of other people, but even then, this seems quite high for Casper. I believe Elite Prospects has him at 12, if I remember correctly, and that is a bit more reasonable. Just Casper, to me, does not have the upside of a top 10 pick. He is another pretty solid all around guy. He can bring a lot of energy. He can be physical. He can be defensively responsible, but the skill there is just not really blowing me away. He's an effective hockey player. But really, I think ultimately you're probably getting a third line center, and that is nothing to sneeze at. But if you're drafting eighth overall, you're probably hoping at getting a guy who's a little bit more impactful than that. So I just think that that is pretty high for Casper. Okay, 9, Joachim Kamel. That is pretty middle of the road for him. Most people have him towards the end of the top 10. I believe I have him at like 11 or 12, so we don't really disagree too much here. He has a good shot, so he is trending flat according to them, so that's interesting. But yeah, he has a really good shot. He does tend to shoot the puck a little more than I would like. And what I mean by that is that there's definitely instances where I would kind of prefer that he passes. I think his shooting percentage was a bit higher this season in Liga than it really should be. He got away with some pretty weak goals, if I'm being honest. And yeah, so I think the hype around him might be a little bit blown out of proportion given his goals per game this season, because you just look at the stat line and 15 goals in 39 Liga games, like that is super impressive. But several of those I think were pretty weak goals in general on shots that were not really great decisions to shoot. I mean, obviously they went in, and putting the puck on net is never really like a bad decision. But in terms of creating consistent offense, there are definitely times, like in some of those instances where he did score, where it is statistically speaking a better play to pass. So I do think he's a little bit overblown there, but nothing crazy. At 10, they have Lakari Maki. So I actually have these guys back to back in my rankings as well. And I have Kamel one slot ahead of Lakari Maki too, so that's interesting. We pretty much agree on these two guys relative to each other. Lakari Maki is another guy pretty similar to Kamel, I would say. Kamel doesn't quite have the same shot selection problem as Lakari Maki does. I think with Lakari Maki is a little bit worse, which is my reasoning for having him lower than Kamel. But yeah, so that's their top 10. 11 is Connor Geeky. That is another one that I really don't like at all. Geeky is a pretty solid playmaker. Outside of that, I don't really like him that much. He was playing on a very good Winnipeg Ice team this year, and to be quite honest, I think he was outshined by one of his line mates in Zach Benson, who is not draft eligible. Benson is a guy who is eligible for the 2023 draft. And I thought, and quite frankly, despite the fact that I was specifically watching Geeky and Savoy on Winnipeg, Benson kind of stood out to me more than Geeky did, even though I was not specifically watching for him, especially early in the season. So you know, he's big, decent playmaker. I don't think his shot is really anything crazy. His skating is a big issue for me, and that's the main reason that really draws him down for me. I don't think there's a ton of upside, and then with the skating as an issue on top of that, it's just yeah, 11th overall is really high for me. I barely have him in my first round. 12 is Isaac Howard. That's quite interesting. I can't remember exactly where I have him, but first half of the first round is pretty accurate for him, I think. This is a guy that is pure upside. His offensive game is really off the charts, but his defense is pretty bad, to say the least. He's going to need to work on his 200-foot game. if he is going to be trusted by NHL coaches. But having him at 12, that's pretty solid. I like that quite a bit. Okay, so 13 is Kevin Korchinski, which is interesting because this is their third highest ranked defenseman, and he is my third highest ranked defenseman as well. And I actually have him ranked in a very similar spot to this, so seems like we pretty much agree on him. And the big things I like about his game is his skating. And yeah, that seems like that's what they have right here. It says great skating ability that allows him to get back on pucks quickly, initiate the rush, and walk the offensive blue zone line. Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. He's big and he's a good skater, and I've said it a million times. I'll say it again. Those are the foundations of a really solid defenseman. I don't think that there's necessarily a crazy amount of upside with Korchinski, but he could be a solid offensive guy who maybe plays on your top power play unit. I think he's more likely a high end like power play 2 quarterback. But yeah, that is yet to be seen. Okay, 14. Yeah, I guess it is 14. Frank Nazar. So this, I can't remember exactly where I have Nazar. It seems a little bit high for him. He's above guys like Gauthier, which I find interesting. A lot of people have Gauthier higher than Nazar. Right now, I technically believe I have Nazar higher than Gauthier, but I am very tempted to swap those guys on my rankings. So I'm a bit conflicted. But Nazar, he's another guy that is a decent amount of upside. I think he's a pretty good playmaker. Um, Projectable. He's small, but fast. He's really fast, even. And yeah, I have 14 for Nazar. That's fine. I was hoping for a little bit more controversy, things that I would disagree with. But yeah, 15 is Daniil Yurov. That is also seems a little bit high on Yurov for me. He's a really solid all around player, but he just did not play in the KHL. I mean, he did, but he wasn't really getting any ice time, and there's kind of a reason for that. I would be a little bit worried drafting him, especially this high, because of the fact that one, he's Russian, and there's obviously things going on with Russian players right now. And the other concern is the fact that he was hardly playing any ice time at all in the KHL. So if he's going to continue playing in the KHL next season, he better be getting more than a couple minutes of ice time a game in order, because if he's not getting any ice time, he's not going to develop. So in terms of skill, yeah, maybe this high. I have him more around 20, but I don't really think he's going to get drafted that high. I don't even know if he's going to get drafted around 20 either. Okay, so 16 is Denton Mateychuk. That is interesting. That makes him their fourth highest ranked defenseman, and Mateychuk is a guy that I think has a decent amount of upside. He was a point per game in the WHL this year, which is pretty impressive for a draft eligible defenseman, but he plays a style that is really, I don't think, projectable to the NHL. It's kind of interesting in their little description of him here. It says he has plenty of hockey IQ and ability to adapt to what the game throws at him. I don't really agree with that. It kind of depends on what they mean by hockey IQ, but he is frequently cherry picking for offense, and he plays a very, very heavily offensive leaning style of game. I don't think that he's like some Swiss Army knife guy that can play any style you want. He pretty much plays the style of game he plays, and that's it. So I don't think his game is really that adaptable in that sense. I don't think his hockey IQ is really that high either. He does see offensive plays really well. He sees plays develop in the offensive zone really well. I'll give him that. But to have him at 16, again, is pretty high. He is a very risky pick for me. Okay, at 17, we have Mintyukov. He is another high risk guy, and it says right here in their description as well, a high risk player with excellent offensive instincts. Yeah, that's pretty much my one sentence description of Mintyukov as well. He's a pretty good skater, and yeah, he's one of the few guys in this draft class that I think could run a top power play unit. I will say that Matejchuk is one of those guys as well, but he just plays a very different style. He almost doesn't really feel like a defenseman at times when he's creating offense, so that's a bit weird. But Mintyukov is more of a traditional offensive defenseman and is a guy that I could see as running a top uh, a top power play unit in the NHL. Okay, 18 is Jimmy Snuggerud. This is a guy that I don't really have in my first round. I don't think I think he's like 33 or 34 on my list right now. They characterize him as having a really good shot and has a good one timer. I agree with that. He has a good shot. Other than that, though, doesn't really impress me that much. He's 6'1", listed at 188 according to them, but it doesn't really feel like he plays that to his size that well, and his defense also doesn't impress me like at all. I mean, it's pretty common for junior players to have defensive lapses, especially for forwards, so they're going to have to work on that part of their game. But ultimately, Snuggerud is a guy that I think could score maybe 20 goals at the NHL level, but other than that, I'm not sure how much more he's going to provide in terms of offense either. At number 19, they have Noah Ostlund, which is a pretty interesting pick. He is a hard worker. Does have an outside shot, I think, at becoming a top 6 guy, but that's not entirely likely. He is pretty small, but again, he is a hard worker, pretty decent 200-foot player. But the main thing with him, or I guess this is kind of just comparing him to other players from his same team, is that uh, where's Liam Ogren? Most people have, I believe, anyways, most people have Ogren ahead of Ostlund. So it is quite interesting to see Ostlund this high. I do think he is a little bit of a risky pick, despite the fact that he's such a hard worker and a decent 200-foot guy. He's just undersized and he kind of has small player problems. I also don't think his shot is really that good. I think he needs to work on his shot a little bit, but that is more of an offensive upside question than it is an NHL projectability question. But yeah, I don't know. It's I don't necessarily agree with the placement in general, but having him behind Ogren is interesting. Okay, here we go. So at number 20, we have Brad Lambert. That seems to be where most people have him in this range. But yeah, they have it listed right here. This year's Atu Ratu. Very possible. I have him ranked much higher than this, despite the fact that he has fallen on my board. I just think that his combination of skill and speed is something that very few players in this draft class, if any players in this draft class, have better than he does. He definitely has not put up numbers that you would expect in Liga this year, but he had a very dominant U18s in the short 3 games I believe they played. One was a pre-tournament game, but he looked incredible at that tournament to me, and I feel like that's just what you're going to get when you put Brad Lambert with players that don't suck. So yeah, I think the combination of speed and skill is way too good to have him this low on your list to me. Okay, at 21 we have Owen Pickering. I've lost count of how many defensemen this is now, but yeah, he's a big defenseman who is a pretty good skater. That's pretty much all I have to say about Pickering. Having him at 21 is pretty reasonable. I think that's relatively close to where I have him. 22, we have Nathan Goucher. So yeah, actually, I think that's pretty good for Goucher. That's about where I have him ranked. A lot of people have him ranked a lot higher than this. Some people have him ranked lower. He seems to be a guy that's a little bit all over the place. I don't think he has a crazy amount of upside, but he's a pretty good, well-rounded player. And yeah, I think that's a good spot for him. Okay, here's Ogren then at 23. And yeah, I mean, I have Ogren ranked a decent bit higher than this. I think of the Jew Garden guys, Ogren is probably my favorite overall. Lakari Maki has the best shot, but Ogren I kind of trust the most to develop into a legitimate NHL player, and he can score goals in his own right as well. Um, but he's also a pretty solid playmaker, and I think he's the safest. Is that right? Yeah, I think he's pretty much the safest of the Jew Garden guys. So I would definitely have him above Ostland. Um, yeah, 23. It's okay. It's a little bit low for me. Oh, we're starting to get into guys that don't even have a little profile here. At 24, Leon Bichel. This is a guy who I haven't seen a lot of this year. To be honest, I don't really have a strong opinion about him, but he is big and he can skate. Everybody says he's a good skater, so having him in the first round is pretty reasonable to me. I know he's kind of a bubble first round player for a lot of people, but again, large defensemen who are good skaters are get good grades if I'm the teacher. So yeah, 24, that seems reasonable for him. Okay, let's see. At 25, they have Rutger McGroarty. Uh, they say he is a solid two-way option. His personality and leadership qualities make him a valuable pick in the later stages of round one. Okay, so that is something that's actually kind of interesting because that is something that I don't really have any idea of on any of these players because I haven't met any of them in person. Sportsnet likely does have scouts that have met these players in person, possibly at the combine. So they can speak to things like character and personality more than I can. So if that is something that you value, then sure, I could see that being a justification for the placement. But I wouldn't put too much stock into that. Obviously, you don't want to draft a guy who's like an asshole or a jerk. But yeah, 25 for McGroarty. I have him at 32. So at this point in the draft, especially this year, it's kind of a coin toss on pretty much all these guys. Their rankings are so all over the place. Opinions are varying. It feels like with a larger degree than normal. So really a difference of 7 spots at this point in the draft for me is not really a big deal. 26 is Luca Del Bel Beluz. Maybe I didn't like him that much. He's more of a second round guy for me. 27, Miroshnichenko. That's interesting. I know a lot of people have him ranked in this range. To me, Miroshnichenko is a bit risky because he missed most of this year. So he didn't get a ton of chance to develop. But to me, the skill that he showed at the beginning of the year before his cancer diagnosis is enough to have him ranked higher than this for me. Yeah. 28 is Jagger Firkus. That's way too low on Firkus, and at this point, I'm not even joking. Most people have him ranked higher than that. I have him ranked 16th, I think, right now. And the more I watch him, the more I'm tempted to move him up even more than that. This is a player who could legitimately be the best goal scorer in this year's draft class. And in addition to that, he scored a Michigan this year, which is freaking awesome. So, yeah, I would have him at least 10 spots higher than that. And for a player like Firkus, that is a big deal to me. If he does go that late in the first round, though, that's going to be a huge steal for somebody. So let's see. I think I'm just going to go through these last few guys in rapid fire succession here. Paravolov at 29. I guess he's more of a second round guy for me. Kulich at 30. Yeah, that's about right. I think I have him within a few spots of that, so pretty much agree there. Chesley at 31, a player that I haven't specifically watched too much of. I've been focusing more on a lot of his teammates. Let's see. They say he defends well, moves pucks efficiently, may not be a major point getter, but another player aware of what his strengths are. Yeah, that seems right to me. He didn't really blow me away in any aspect in particular, but defense is something that is a bit easier to overlook. So with Chesley, you might be getting like a middle pair defensive defenseman with a little bit of offensive upside, maybe. But yeah, so a guy with that type of profile in general, late first round, early second round, that seems to be where those guys typically go. So 31, that's pretty much right on the money for Chesley, I think. And 32 is Noah Warren. That's interesting. He's huge. He's a decent skater and doesn't really provide much offense at all, in my opinion. I don't think he's going to really provide any offense to the NHL level. But he can play physical and he is pretty decent defensively. So having him at 32, though, that does seem pretty high. Like even a guy like Chesley, Chesley has a bit of offensive potential, I think, versus Warren is a guy who I don't really think has any offensive potential much to speak of. I mean, he has a pretty powerful shot, both and a powerful one-timer that he can unleash from the point. But generally speaking, those are always going to be low percentage shots anyways. So I mean, maybe he's a guy who puts up like 5 or 6 goals a year, which if that's like a third pairing defenseman, that's actually pretty good. But it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not really game changing in any way. But he will provide a pretty valuable role to any team with his defense and his physicality as well. But I just don't see it at 32 for him. I would be more tempted to take him in like the mid to late 50s. Maybe even if he's falling lower than that, sure. But 32, I mean, basically as a first round pick. I mean, this last thing here, they say he projects to be a two-way defenseman as a pro. I don't really see that at all. Like I said, I don't think he brings much offense. So yeah, basically you're saying like there's a lot of other players that are not in your first round, and Noah Warren is. Let's see. A couple of guys on D alone that come to mind that could be in this spot are Lane Hudson and Christian Kyrou. Those are two guys that have way more offensive upside than Warren and could end up being like much bigger impact guys at the NHL level. And those are both guys that I would definitely not necessarily 100% have in my first round. They are both in my first round for now. But either way, they're both way ahead of Warren. So even if those guys fall out of my first round, they're definitely going to be ahead of Noah Warren. So that is kind of a peculiar pick for 32. But yeah, that's about it for this video, I guess. If you did like it, please do give it a like. That really helps me out. Leave a comment. What do you think about some of these guys? I try to respond to every comment. And yeah, I'll put another video on screen now if you want to stick around and watch another video. If not, that's cool too. And whatever you do, have a nice day.